It's basically a complete scam. A person contacted me on the phone saying that they were working for a car dealership, Happier Cars, and they would be interested in selling my car. Yeah, the buyer was super happy with the car apparently, and they said, well, look, your car is gonna be sold. Please leave us the car here so we can wash it and prepare it for the buyer. It's been nearly 5 months and I have not received a penny. If these people are not taken to justice, they're just gonna keep harming other people and taking their savings.
The experiences weren't great initially. When I went to the police independently, it took them just under 24 hours to tell me that it's a civil case and they don't want to get involved. It's literally right in my grasp, but it's not there. And with everything that's gone on and the experience with Happier Cars, I've now believed that nothing is impossible. You know, there is a chance that I might not even get this car.
Can't take your call right now. Just leave your message after the tone.
Look at this man. He sits in front of the camera, his shoulders heavy, his voice quiet and heavy with disappointment. 22,000 pounds, gone. Not through gambling, not through recklessness, but through trust. Trust placed in a dealership that promised safety, professionalism, and speed. Happier Cars. There are no tears here, no shouting, only the calm weight of a man who knows he has been deceived. His words carry a sadness that hits harder than anger. The story of a car he worked hard to own, handed over with the expectation of fair payment, and the crushing silence that followed when that payment never came. He thought he was entering into a straightforward agreement. A dealership with polished branding, sleek offices, and smiling staff told him they would sell his Tesla quickly, handle the process securely, and deliver the money within days. Instead, weeks turned into silence, and silence turned into loss. His car was gone. His money never arrived. And he was not alone. Across the country, families and individuals were discovering the same nightmare. Cars consigned in good faith, BMWs, Range Rovers, Mercedes, vanished. Payments delayed, excuses recycled, phones disconnected. What had looked like a modern, trustworthy dealership had instead become a trap. From the outside, Happier Cars was everything a customer wanted. A professional website, glossy branding, contracts that looked airtight, and staff who radiated confidence. But beneath the surface, the operation was already collapsing. And that's where we come in. Welcome to Brand Guy, where we uncover the hidden truths behind businesses that shine on the outside but rot in the shadows. Today, we dive into the story of Happier Cars, a dealership that promised happiness but delivered heartbreak. Because if a company this polished could take in millions of pounds worth of vehicles and vanish, the question isn't just how did it happen? The question is, could it happen again to you? The story began with one man in tears, but he was only the first thread in a web of devastation. As word spread, more voices emerged. Families, professionals, retirees, all telling the same story of misplaced trust. Each believed they were handing over their vehicles to a company that would safeguard them, find buyers, and return fair payment. Instead, what they received was silence. Take the case of a young couple who consigned their Range Rover. They needed the money to cover tuition fees, and Happier Cars offered exactly what they wanted: speed, security, and a competitive price. Weeks passed. Every phone call ended with vague explanations. The transfer is pending. The buyer's finance is still processing. Then, suddenly, the calls stopped being answered at all. Their Range Rover was gone, their money never arrived, and the dream of paying tuition on time evaporated. Another victim, a man in Manchester, described how he handed over his BMW M3, expecting a straightforward sale. The paperwork looked professional, stamped with logos and written in complex legal language. It gave him confidence that this was a legitimate operation. But when the agreed deadline for payment passed, he began to worry. Days turned into weeks. His emails went unanswered, his phone calls redirected to voicemail. When he finally visited the office in person, the staff who had once smiled and reassured him were nowhere to be found. So how did Happier Cars convince so many people to trust them? The answer lies in the careful image they built. First, the appearance of legitimacy. Their website was sleek and modern, with professional branding that rivaled established dealerships. The language was polished, safe transactions, hassle-free service, trusted by car owners nationwide. It was designed to inspire confidence, and for many, it worked. Second, the contracts. Victims consistently described the documents as airtight. They included legal clauses, detailed timelines, and official-looking seals. For customers, it felt like proof that they were protected. But these contracts turned out to be nothing more than window dressing, legalistic enough to seem convincing, but ultimately worthless when the company disappeared. Third, the personal touch. The staff were charismatic and persuasive. They shook hands, smiled warmly, and spoke with authority. They reassured customers with lines like, "We've done this hundreds of times," or "You'll see your money within days." The human element created trust that paperwork alone never could. But beneath this polished surface, the red flags were always there. Phone numbers linked to the company changed frequently, making it difficult to trace calls. Some directors tied to Happier Cars had previous business failures, though few customers knew this when they signed. And most damning of all, payments that should have been nearly instant were constantly delayed, with excuses that grew thinner by the day. Negative reviews began appearing online, short, angry warnings that something was wrong. At first, many potential customers dismissed them, assuming they were from impatient sellers or even competitors. But soon, the warnings became a pattern. Dozens of voices, all describing the same nightmare. Cars gone, money missing, excuses mounting. The more stories surfaced, the clearer the picture became. Happier Cars wasn't a struggling business that had fallen behind. It was a system built on deception from the ground up. The showroom was real, the contracts looked professional, the staff seemed trustworthy, but it was all part of an illusion. For the victims, realization came too late. By the time they noticed the pattern of unanswered calls, locked offices, and shifting contact details, their cars were already gone. The dealership had taken their vehicles, flicked them quickly, and left nothing but empty promises in its wake. And this was only the beginning, because as investigators would soon discover, Happier Cars' behavior went far beyond financial mismanagement. The truth waiting to be uncovered would shock even the most skeptical observers.
For a while, customers held on to hope. They told themselves the delays were temporary, that maybe the payments were caught up in banking processes, or that a minor accounting issue would soon be resolved. But then came the revelation that shattered whatever trust remained. Happier Cars was in the process of dissolving, even as it continued to accept new consignments. This was the moment when suspicion turned to outrage. A dealership that had already failed to pay existing clients was still inviting new customers through its doors, still smiling as they accepted keys to Teslas, Range Rovers, and BMWs. To many, it felt like outright theft wearing the mask of business. One man described his final visit to the company's office. He arrived with his contract in hand, demanding either his car back or the money he was owed. The sight that greeted him was surreal. The glass doors, once polished and welcoming, were locked. Through the window, he saw desks abandoned, paper scattered, chairs tipped over as if staff had left in a hurry. The once busy showroom was silent. It was like walking into a crime scene, he later recalled. He wasn't alone. Across the country, customers made the same pilgrimage to Happier Cars offices and satellite lots, only to find empty spaces where their vehicles had once stood. Some said it felt like chasing ghosts. Cars that were supposed to be on display had vanished, and no one could tell them where those vehicles had gone. The betrayal hit hardest because of how ordinary everything had seemed. Happier Cars didn't operate from a hidden warehouse or a backstreet garage. It had branding, staff, and a visible presence. To its victims, it looked as real as any other dealership. And that illusion made the collapse all the more devastating. As the scandal spread, whispers turned into headlines. People asked how a company in the process of closing its doors could still collect assets worth tens of thousands of pounds. How could no one stop them? Where were the safeguards meant to protect consumers? Behind the scenes, investigators scrambled to follow the paper trail. They found vehicles had been sold on quickly, sometimes to buyers in other parts of the UK, sometimes exported abroad. The money trail was harder to follow. Payments were scattered across accounts, drained before victims could claim their share. Directors gave little cooperation, insisting problems were due to cash flow issues, even as evidence mounted that customers had been systematically deceived. For the victims, the climax was not a dramatic courtroom scene or a sudden revelation of justice. It was the cold reality of standing outside an abandoned office, staring at locked doors, realizing their cars and their money were gone for good. It was the sickening feeling of recognizing that the company hadn't just failed them. It had used its final days to squeeze out every last vehicle it could, even while preparing to vanish. This was the mask finally slipped. The polished branding and reassuring words were gone. What remained was an empty showroom and a trail of broken lives. And yet, as devastating as this climax was, the full truth had not yet surfaced. Because hidden beneath the fraud and the vanished cars was a darker twist, one that would transform this scandal from a financial con into a criminal enterprise. Just when the victims thought they had uncovered the worst of it, the missing payments, the vanished staff, the empty offices, a darker truth emerged. Happier Cars hadn't simply failed to honor contracts. It had been moving stolen vehicles through its system, using the facade of a legitimate dealership to disguise criminal activity. The realization came as people began tracking where their missing cars had gone. A man who had consigned his Range Rover discovered it listed for sale hundreds of miles away under a different dealer's name. The documents looked official, but closer inspection revealed irregularities. The VIN didn't match the logbook. The registration papers bore signs of tampering. His car hadn't just been sold without payment, it had been laundered into the black market. Others reported similar discoveries. A Tesla turned up overseas, advertised online under a new identity. A Mercedes resurfaced with altered documents, making it nearly impossible to trace back to its original owner. Each case painted the same picture. Happier Cars wasn't merely mismanaging sales. It was feeding vehicles into a network of stolen and rebranded cars. This was the twist that turned suspicion into certainty. Happier Cars wasn't a struggling business caught in financial trouble. It was a front. The polished contracts, the slick branding, the professional smiles, all of it was camouflage for something far more sinister. Customers hadn't just been defrauded, they had unknowingly placed their cars into the hands of criminals. For those who had already lost their vehicles, the revelation was devastating. One woman, whose BMW disappeared after she handed over the keys, described the heartbreak of learning it might never return. "It's not just about the money," she said. "It's knowing that my car is out there somewhere, being driven by someone who doesn't even know it was stolen from me." The discovery also cast every reassuring word from Happier Cars in a new, chilling light. When staff told customers, "We do this every day," it was true, but not in the way anyone imagined. The dealership had become a conveyor belt, shuffling vehicles from legitimate owners into a criminal network, hiding the thefts behind contracts that looked too professional to question. For investigators, the twist meant the case was no longer just about financial restitution. It was about dismantling a system that blurred the line between fraud and organized crime. Each missing car wasn't just a breach of contract, it was evidence of a larger scheme. Each forged logbook or altered VIN was a sign that Happier Cars had been part of something designed to deceive not just car owners, but the entire market. The public reaction was explosive. What had once been described as a business collapse was now recognized as a calculated operation. People no longer spoke of mismanagement or liquidity issues. They spoke of fraud, conspiracy, and theft. Happier Cars was no longer simply a failed dealership. It was a criminal enterprise hiding in plain sight. And for the victims, the final sting was realizing that justice would be slow, uncertain, and incomplete. Cars had crossed borders, documents had been falsified, money had been siphoned away. Even if prosecutions followed, few expected to see their vehicles or their payments again. The twist left one lasting impression. Happier Cars had never been about selling cars safely. It had been about stripping trust, laundering assets, and leaving chaos behind.
When the dust finally settled, Happier Cars was gone. Its offices stood empty, its phones disconnected, its promises reduced to scraps of paper that meant nothing. What remained was a trail of broken trust. Families without their vehicles, individuals without the money they were counting on, and a growing awareness that they had been caught in something far bigger than a simple business dispute. For many victims, the losses were devastating. A father who needed the funds from his BMW to cover his mortgage now faced financial strain. A couple who consigned their Range Rover to pay for tuition were forced to borrow money instead. A woman whose Mercedes had disappeared said she still wakes in the night wondering where her car is now and if she will ever see justice. Authorities promised investigations and files were opened, but the scale of the deception made recovery difficult. Cars had been sold and resold, some already exported, their identities altered beyond recognition. Bank accounts that once held customer money were drained and closed. Directors had gone silent, leaving lawyers and regulators to untangle the mess. The scandal left regulators with hard questions. How could a company in the process of dissolving still take on new consignments? Why were warnings ignored until it was too late? And most importantly, how many more businesses might be operating under the same disguise, waiting to trap the next wave of victims? For the public, the lesson is simple but sobering. Trust is not built on glossy branding, professional contracts, or reassuring words. Those can all be manufactured. Real trust comes from verification, background checks, and skepticism. When the transaction involves tens of thousands of pounds, blind faith is a luxury no one can afford. And that is why the story of Happier Cars matters. It is not just about one failed dealership. It is about a system that allowed deceit to masquerade as professionalism, and about ordinary people who paid the price. So, as we close this story, ask yourself, if a company this polished, this convincing, could vanish overnight with millions in cars and cash, what would stop it from happening again? And more importantly, how would you protect yourself if the next Happier Cars was already waiting? Because sometimes the biggest threat to our security is not the scam we can spot, but the one that looks too real to question until it's far too late.